So I'm thrilled to have Kiona Osowski with us today from Moncton, New Brunswick. As you know, we've been doing little video snacks or audio snacks, talking with lots of different people in lots of walks of life about leadership and about how whole human beings show up in the workplace. And I'm really excited to have Kiona here with us today because I think she's a terrific example of leadership in possibly an unexpected place, that is a Moncton, New Brunswick high school.
Yeah.
And I would love to just sort of use the same framework that we've used for the other interviews and get her to weigh in on some of her experiences and some of her philosophies. So welcome to the show, Kiona.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you. One of the philosophies that we have at Purple Voodoo is that whole human beings show up in the workplace. That is, we don't just cleave off parts of ourselves and keep the rest of ourselves outside of the workplace. How does that resonate for you?
Well, when you talk about that, I think that I completely agree with that statement and the fact that, when you have a person coming into a workplace or even a school environment, you have to consider the fact that all aspects of a person are showing up. And because of that, you have to use your resources to make that person feel like they can perform to their best ability and feel safe and secure. Because when you come to work, as much as you'd like to leave your personal situations at home, it's not going to happen. And the same thing at school. And we always need to consider when we're talking to other people that they have a story going on just as much as we do. And so that therefore we can adjust our language and the way we communicate with that person in order to respect that aspect.
So Kiona, maybe you can just backtrack and give us a little bit of history as to how you and I even got connected. Because just for the listeners, we got connected because I read an article about you and I thought, oh my gosh, she's fantastic. I need to speak with her. But can you just give us a little bit of background on what led you to create the research, and then how did that journey play out?
Mm-hmm. So I started last semester, I guess it was now, doing an independent study. So this is something that isn't really well known in our school system, but it is something that's available to us. And I seeked out two of my teachers and I asked them to do this project where basically I would spend an hour a day committed to something that I was really passionate about. And I chose to look at gender toxicity. And gender toxicity is basically looking at how the media and even our society portrays men and women and how they are developing negative self-images of themselves, but also of each other as well. So I thought that was a really interesting topic. And when I was younger and I was coming into high school, I had a lot of struggles with my own body image. And I had struggles of, what does it mean to be a woman for me? And why do I feel the need to, look pretty, sit still, look pretty type thing? And at the same time, when I was considering that, especially this year, I've noticed the struggles that boys go through and the pressures that they feel to be a man, as we've often say. So I looked at these two issues and I decided to start looking at gender toxicity. And as I went on through last semester, I did a lot of research and I spent probably a straight month doing research, and I continue my research today. But what I started really looking at, because I was in a school environment, was our curriculum. And I was looking at how are we teaching young boys and girls to interact with themselves because of their gender, and interact with each other because of their gender, and interact with technology because of gender. There's so many different areas. So I started revising the curriculum and looking over what could be changed. And that led me to so many different areas, and I continue today to go to schools and talk. But what happened is that Vanessa Blanche, a CBC writer, came to me and she asked me to do an interview. So we did an interview and it kind of blew up overnight. I wasn't really expecting it. And before I knew it, I was getting all these offers to work with different organizations, and my story started really getting out there. So now I just keep going forward. It's really exciting.
And what do you think that all of that immediate reaction and enthusiasm for your story, what do you think that says?
Well, I think it just shows that what I'm doing is relevant. When I talk about girls having insecurities about their body and about, who they are, because of the societal pressure to look good. And when I talk about, men in this toxic masculinity not feeling able to express emotion and being in toxic environments in their sports world and sometimes even in their home, I think me presenting that information, there are a lot of people who are going to be uncomfortable with it, but for the most part, people know it's something that's happening and they know that it's important and that we need to get it out there. So I think that the reaction I got from the article, and I talked to Vanessa, and she's like, that was like the top story for 5 days. And I was like, wow, this is weird. But I think it just goes to show that it's an important issue, and that's why I continue working on it today.
And how have your peers reacted to it, either through their participation in your research, or, I mean, they pay attention, they see you now on media. What's been the reaction from your own peer group or from any other young people that may have reached out to you?
Mhm. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback for sure. Like when I was going to different classes, and I've started going to different schools as well to present my project and do my presentation. A lot of them, when I'd ask them, like, do you think this is relevant? They all raise their hands and they're like, absolutely. And I've had several young girls and even young boys come up to me and say, thank you so much. Like, this is phenomenal. And it means so much to me because I know that it's valuable and I know it's having an impact on people. And it's not just having an impact on youth, which is something I knew it would have, but it's having an impact on adults and the conversations they're having in their homes. So I think it's valuable, and I think it's great to have the positive feedback. And I mean, I've gotten the negative feedback as well. There are some people who are uncomfortable with the topic who are older, and they've been giving me a lot of negative feedback specifically on the article. And then there are some peers of mine that have been giving me really negative feedback, but I try to just remind myself that those people just don't want to hear what is being said because they know it's the truth.
That's really interesting. And it kind of circles back to our original brief discussion around a whole human being,
Yeah.
a whole human being showing up in the education system or in a community. And certainly can speak for the fact that in my 30 years in the business world, the same kind of areas of discomfort happen where people might be uncovering really important opportunities to remediate possibly even really toxic behaviors and cultural norms or cultural myths within an organization or within a system. And the most challenging part of inciting change are even a minority of people saying, well, we don't want to talk about that. We would rather just pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And then sometimes that makes other people say, well, I know it exists, but I don't really want to rock the boat either. So it's really interesting. And like, how do you perceive the opportunity to balance both of those different voices?
Yeah, for sure.
You
And
know?
I think it's interesting too, because when you're interacting, whether you're the person who's creating, I guess, the awareness in society, or whether you're the person who's receiving it, each person has to have their due diligence to remember, like you said, those are whole people you're talking to. So, if you look at a public figure and think, oh my gosh, like they're saying things I don't like, I'm going to hate on them and send out hate to them, you have to reconsider and think, okay, that person's just like me, like they have a family, they have emotions and they feel this. So you have to reconsider that before you just put that out there. And the same thing when you're looking back at the people making, mean comments to you or hateful comments or commenting on social media, you have to consider, yes, that person might have, naive views, or, that person is saying negative things about me, but unfortunately, I am not going to return that hate to them because I'm realizing that person is a whole human being and that they're just like me, but they have different views. So I think it's important to consider when you're interacting with people.
Yeah. And you refer there really to an explicit mindset, right? You're choosing a mindset of empathy.
Yeah.
And a mindset of recognizing a whole human being and behaving in a way that is in alignment with your values. So it's not like you're being hypocritical. You're practicing what you're hoping to preach, which is, hey, see me and other young people as whole people who are struggling with really a lot of, I guess, on one hand, very traditional and systemic gender toxicity and norms, but at the same time, emerging ways of amplifying that. So how do you both recognize that and then ensure that you're spending even more focus and more energy on staying connected to that whole human beingness?
Yeah. And it is hard with social media, especially because you're only seeing one side of the person. So, when you're scrolling, I talk about this in my presentation, when you're scrolling through Instagram and you see that perfect girl who's, super pretty, she has like super blonde hair, she's super tan, she's eating kale and she's like super thin, and you look at her and you're like, oh, like, why can't I look like that? And she's like in Hawaii, right? And
Yeah.
you're only seeing one section of that person, you're not seeing the whole person, and you automatically compare her to yourself, or him to yourself sometimes. So it's important to remember on social media, you're not seeing that whole person. You don't know if that person is actually content with themselves or their life, because they're just posting that one-sided view of themselves.
Right. So when you do your presentations, what if you had to give us just a quick summary, what are some of the main points that you want students to walk away with after one of your presentations?
So in my presentation, one of the first topics that I kind of talk about is, for women, it's body dissatisfaction, and for men, it's mental health issues. And I kind of touch on how the media really emphasizes those two things for young men and women. So for women, they emphasize appearance. For men, they emphasize being a man and being emotionally detached. So I kind of start my presentation talking about that, and then I dive deeper, and I have two sections. The first section is talking about women, and the second section is talking about men. And then in the end, I kind of bring it together. But in the first section, I just talk about how, in our movies, our music videos and commercials, women are shown as their sole purpose to be attractive, and there's so much value put on their body that they start being obsessed with their bodies and even their physical appearance outside their bodies, so their face and how they look. And this can really have a negative effect on young girls because they're watching those movies and they're seeing those protagonists where their main goal is to be attractive. And so then they can kind of get into things like young beauty pageants, where that's just reiterated. You need to be this way, you need to look this way, and that's the only way you can reach success, which can also affect the achievements that girls go for. So, how do you expect a girl wanting to be, a politician or a lawyer if all she's focusing on is her body, because that's what she's been told to focus on? And then I also talk about social media, like I did a few minutes ago, where girls are constantly comparing themselves to unrealistic expectations, especially in the aspect of body physique. And that leads into things like eating disorders. Eating disorders is a big part of my presentation for young girls. They can affect young men as well, but it's more of an epidemic with young women. After I kind of wrap that up and I talk about a few other areas, I also start going into the male perspective and looking at how advertising portrays, and the media portrays, men as often dominant over women and owning women, and they often portray them as very aggressive and very emotionally detached. And this creates a sense for young men that they're not allowed to express their emotions or who they are. And in their movies, especially, and their rap songs, all those areas, they are getting this message that they need to be aggressive and they need to treat women a certain way, and that they need to be sexual in certain ways, and that if they're not confident in these areas, then they're not what a man should be. And it puts a lot of shame to young men, and they start believing that, if they're not a womanizer, if they're not super masculine, then they're not a man, which creates a lot of issues for young men's mental health. And it's actually shown that the suicide rates for young boys are 3 times higher than girls, which says a lot, I believe, because they're not just getting this message that they have to be masculine, but if they're not masculine, their peers even show them disdain, and they get bullied, and the bullying rates are so high, and there are just so many places that they will go and they will feel ashamed because they think they're being too feminine, because we've created, this misogyny. So I talk about men's mental health and how poor that has become. And in the end, my takeaway, I think, for them is for young girls to start treating each other with kindness when it comes to eating, talking about, have a healthy relationship with eating. And instead of, going to your friend and say, I haven't eaten all day, and your friend says, oh, me neither, saying, no, like, that's not okay, we need to get you help. And instead of bashing on yourself so much, to start catching yourself and having positive self-talk. And for the men, I just talk about, supporting each other and getting away from that, masculine sense, and just saying, well, I want to be my own man. And then also take that a step further. And if you hear men, talking negatively about females, then to kind of step in and be that person. So there's a lot of content, but that's kind of like a little summary of what I think is most important.
I love the fact that although you are a young woman and I think demonstrating exemplary leadership, that you're focusing on both genders. You know, I love the fact, because I do think that especially today, there is a tendency to have a binary conversation. You're either for this or for this. Right. And if you're for this, then you're against this. And really applaud you for looking at gender toxicity on both sides, and probably even a spectrum, which is what are some of the cultural myths or norms or belief systems that we need to challenge for both genders or all genders, which will enable each person to feel more like a whole person.
Yeah, exactly.
And accepted, right, as a whole person.
Yeah, for sure.
So how do you think this plays out? And maybe this was part of your research as well, I'm not sure, but how does this play out in terms of relationships between, you know, young men and young women these days, either in the high school setting or elsewhere? I know you and I talked very briefly about sort of this whole, you know, sexting, and there's a whole bunch of other things that happen, but how do these two toxicities play out?
What I've found in my research a lot, and even in observations in my own peer groups, is that, I mean, what we see in Canada is there's a lot more violence towards women. There's a lot of domestic violence, which isn't to say it can't happen towards men again. Like, I never want to not include men in the conversation, because I know there are, you know, there are men that experience that. But for the majority, we are talking about women. They are experiencing a lot more domestic violence. And as teens, I think we're experiencing a lot more negative attitudes and aggressive attitudes from men towards women, which is unfortunate, because men are growing up in a society where they're being told that this very aggressive, assertive, dominant man is the way to interact with women. And it especially comes from the porn industry. And in the porn industry, we see, you know, this very successful, rich man with a big house and a beautiful woman treat her in very aggressive and unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
And when you have a young watching that, but you have the young girl not watching it, when they go to interact sexually, it creates a really big issue, because the guy just says, "Don't worry, I got it."
Yeah.
And the girl thinks that she's supposed to be treated that way, and it could be a really unhealthy sexual encounter. It's creating unhealthy sexual relationships, and you could go to, again, sexting in that manner, where there's this pressure to, in order to interact with a guy and for him to keep interacting with you, you have to send him these pictures. And for guys, if you want to be a man, you have to ask for them. So it creates an issue there. And I think the intimacy really of relationships is really deteriorating, in the sense that cheating has become something that is more normalized, because it's more normal for men to have multiple partners. And, you know, in some cases, it's normal for women to have multiple partners. So I think there's this huge issue where you have insecure young women, and then you have men who believe that there are certain ways to treat women and interact with them. And when you put the two together, you have this kind of like hierarchy where men are, you know, thinking, I have to be this way to this woman, and that's what she wants. When in reality, she's not sure what to do, because, you know, she's unsure. And so it creates a really negative relationship. So.
Yeah, and I think that two things that come to mind. One is I find it disheartening that, you know, 50 years ago is when sort of the women's movement started, right, back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And although there have been great strides, we are still in this position that you've just described. And raising young women in this dynamic, and with these cultural norms, and with these pervasive cultural norms, and with young people, really young people, actually having access to some of these visual norms, even through video games and things. I'm astonished when I see some of the overt misogyny and sexist stereotypes in video games. I'm heartened by people like you, however, who are willing to really look at it and not just stand up to the system, but say, hey, I can appreciate you don't want to look at this, but I want to be the voice of what's actually happening in my peer group here, and, you know, around, certainly around North America, and likely around the world. So you may think that we're here, but I want to do actual explicit research. I want to show you some facts. And I also want to look at, as we've talked about, non-binary conversations. We want to talk about the fact that these boys who are doing this and being indoctrinated into this probably don't feel that great either, because generally speaking, they're probably pretty good, loving people, and they don't want to treat other people poorly. But to your point, if they don't, then they don't feel like a man, and then that leads to more shame. And, you know, it really is such an important and pervasive issue that will impact every single facet of a person's life.
Yeah, and again, the issue becomes is that you have these, you have toxic feminism, which arises where women are like, we need to hate men, and again, it comes back to being that whole person. You have to realize, men are growing up in this society where movies like 50 Shades of Grey, where the man openly abuses this woman, but it's seen as attractive.
Yeah.
And men are growing up seeing that, and they're like, well, that's just the way I have to be. And even if they truly think that's how they're supposed to behave, and everywhere around them it's told that that's okay. So you can't expect men to come out of this culture not being like all the messages being sent to them.
Yeah.
So it's really important to stray away from any one-sided way of thinking, whether it be all women are horrible or all men are horrible. You have to again consider that whole person and really think about why is that person acting in that way.
And how do you feel that this, so imagine, you're in grade 12 now, you're going to be moving into university next year. Congratulations, by the way, and hopefully continuing this research. But think about your cohort and some of the other findings that you've had and some of the other young people that you have, and fast forward to 10 years from now where they are going to be in the workplace. How will these issues, do you think, show up in the workplace?
Well, I think right now they're showing up in unfortunate ways, such as there is a lot of expected roles for men and women still, and we think we've strayed far away from that, but we really haven't. We can see that in our politics. Like if you ever read any news articles, it's always focused on how loud a woman is, what she looks like, what she wore, and I know many people aren't fans of Hillary Clinton, but that they really took her for a trip when they were talking about her suits and stuff, and they were really scrutinizing her for that. And I was always curious, why aren't they talking about her policies? Because they're talking about the man's policies. So I see that a lot, especially in politics, where we're still focused on women's looks. And I think for men in the workplace, there's still this ideology that they need to be a certain way and they need to be that assertive boss type person. And I think that we need to be more okay with men being caretakers and pursuing careers like that, because there are men out there that want to do stuff like that. But in the future, I'm hoping that by starting this conversation, and I want to go further in many ways, but I hope by just starting this project and doing what I'm doing, that I will eventually start to raise awareness in areas where other people outside of where I am can take charge and say, you know what, we need to make changes. So I hope that in the future it won't be the same as it is now, where we're getting all these negative messages and it's turning into behaviors. And I'm hoping that it will maybe create a change where people in the workplace can feel that no matter what your gender is, you can do what you want depending on who you are.
Yeah. And I think you raised a couple of really important points around, again, it's a non-binary thing, is you can be a very results-oriented, assertive leader who also has empathy and real care for whole human beings, and creating a culture where people are respected and where they're focused on wholeness and well-being. It's not one or the other. Right.
Exactly.
And so I think that's also an interesting way of moving forward, which is how do we, for either gender, how do you create strength and assertiveness and results orientation and clarity with also empathy for the people in your organization? And so how have you changed anything that's happening at your school in terms of what the system is actually teaching kids as they come up with respect to this gender toxicity, and also with respect to very explicit behaviors that they can or maybe shouldn't do that helps to support their whole human beingness?
So at the moment, like I said, I'm going into schools, and I've been raising awareness within my own school by doing a lot of speeches and interviews, and so in that way, I'm raising awareness. I'm also creating a video of my presentation that will be available probably around May, and will be doing a podcast soon as well, which will be really interesting. So I'm excited about that opportunity. I've also been, I will be helping the district to create some curriculum around the topic, and I'll be creating my own companion guide that will also be available in May. So it kind of is a resource that teachers can use to teach the content I talk about. So there are tons of different areas within it that I talk about that will hopefully shift the classrooms to talking about more positive aspects and different things that can raise awareness. So yeah, so that's what I've been focusing on. I'm working with a lot of different organizations, so I'm hoping to work on some policies and stuff like that. And then I'll be doing a lot of work, like I said, with the district and creating a pamphlet for parents on how to interact with their kids in technology, which is almost finished. So
Yeah. So the majority of the listeners to this conversation are going to be adults. They're going to
yeah.
be adults probably in the workplace, in the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them, if not most of them, will have kids and kids in the sort of tween teen years, maybe even young adults.
Mm-hmm.
What's some of the main things that you would want to say directly to them in terms of what their role could be in helping really to change the way this gender toxicity is so pervasive? What can they do as influencers?
There are a few different areas. I mean, in the area of gender toxicity specifically, I'm someone who I don't agree with raising your child with no gender, because I'm someone who I'm very proud of being a woman, and to have that taken away from me would be a big deprivation for me. My recommendation is that when you're raising your kid is to just ensure that they feel they can be openly who they are, and it doesn't matter their gender. So if you take your kid into the store and they're a boy and they say, I want to play with that pink Barbie, you say, okay, because it shouldn't matter. So if we stop gendering our children so much, sex is biological. You're born with a biological sex, but your gender can change. And your gender doesn't have to be put in these tiny boxes we always put it in. So I think if you're raising a young boy, I think you need to provide a lot of emotional support and let them know that you're there for them, and that it's okay for them to express themselves, and it's okay for them to be themselves, and raise them to know how to treat women and how to treat other people genuinely. And even if you have a son who's a teenager, even creating that environment now where you're not telling them like be a man, don't raise them in that environment. If they cry, put your arm around them and say, let's talk about it, and instead of putting them in that box. And for young girls, it's just really having that conversation of you're more than your body, and trying to take their concentration away so much from their looks, and saying that you're important because of who you are and not your body, and taking that conversation away from there and trying to steer them away from the path of an eating disorder by creating healthy relationships with food and exercise and a healthy body relationship, so that you're displaying something positive. When it comes to things like online behaviors that could be negative resulting from gender toxicity, like nude photos, just having that conversation earlier on and saying like, this is something that you will go through, and I want you to know that I'm here. And my pamphlet will talk about that and all the resources you can reach out to and what to do and what not to do. So
yeah, because I can imagine. So two things come to mind. One is that's going to take courage.
mm-hmm.
I can tell you as a parent, I've had lots of conversations with my child as he grew up into a young man.
Yeah.
Wasn't comfortable for either of us, but I had to choose like, okay, but I'm going to have to reach down and get some courage and have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So to encourage parents out there to have the tough conversations, regardless of how uncomfortable they might feel.
Yeah.
But a question I have for you is often, the first response by a young person is, oh my God, I don't want to talk about this. Like, please don't make me talk about this. What advice do you have in terms of like, do you think that young people, although they might feel a bit embarrassed too, they actually do want to know that their parents are there for them? Or like, what advice do you have around how you think kids will respond to that kind of conversation or support from their parents?
Well, I think just even like creating the space where they know they can go. So in the moment, they might be like, I don't want to talk to you. But, knowing that they have that space is really important. And I think too, just showing an example. So, if you have a young girl, instead of saying, oh, I'm on the keto diet this week, or I'm going to lose 5 pounds and look so great, or, oh God, I look ugly today. It's changing your talk with yourself, because your kids are going to follow you, whether you think so or not, or whether they know it or not. And same with young boys, instead of being like, oh, well, I can't cry, or I can't do this, and I can't do this because I'm a man. Instead saying, it's okay that I feel this way. And once you start displaying those behaviors, I think it's more likely that your children will follow them. But so I think those are my two major things, is, having that open environment and really displaying the attributes and the positive behaviors you want to see with your children.
Yeah, which again, you're talking about two things we speak of in business all the time, is leading by example.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
The leaders have to be less about do as I say and not as I do, and
Yeah,
more about
yeah.
this is what I want from you and for you, for the best of you, and therefore I have to behave accordingly. So even if I don't have the conversation because I'm so uncomfortable, there's a lot of value in children observing their parents, right? And observing and listening and watching and hearing how they interact and what they say.
Yeah.
So that leading by example is something that you can do, even if you're uncomfortable having that overt conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time, Kiona. As I mentioned to you in the last couple conversations we've had, I think that you are a terrific example of young leadership. And
Thank you.
certainly, I love to see people like yourself taking charge of something that you see as important and as really relevant to everyone. And in starting the conversation, as I said, in a very non-binary way, right? It's not one versus the other. It's for everyone. And hopefully, if nothing else, you've talked about raising awareness, encouraging conversations, finding that courage to talk about, to educate, and to apply understanding of gender toxicities, and also then enabling people to make the choices. Like, do I want to be on social media that much? Do I have the choice to say, no, I'm not going to participate in that kind of behavior anymore? Like, to actually start to empower people with this knowledge and support of a peer group, at all levels. So I really applaud you. And as I've mentioned to you before, reach out at any time. I would love to continue to support you as you move through your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And good luck with the end of your school year.
Thanks.